Good night, and welcome to one and all. This is Alternate Views. The host, Kemar Stuart speaking, along with co-host Nigel Franklyn. Welcome to the night's platform. We're good to have you on here yet another Thursday. Nigel, welcome to Alternate Views. How are you doing, sir?
All is well. All is well. Thank you for having me for another week of alternate views. Uh, I look forward to this every Thursday. It's definitely a pleasure and an honor. Greetings in the name of peace to everybody, peace to the planet. Our early supporters, thank you for being here with us, and let's get ready for another week of alternate views. The title of this week's episode is the Barbados dollar, currency devaluation, dollarization, or depreciation. So just a precursor to what we will be introing tonight. Well, back to you, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, so thank you very much, sir. As we welcome everyone, the early viewers, we want to express gratitude again once more. Don't forget to like, don't forget to share alternate views tonight. Tonight promises to be a very interesting discussion. Today, it was announced that Barbados had a meeting with the IMF. They called it an IMF exit meeting. So we are yet to get the definition as to what that may be. But tonight we are going to get all into it and have a deep discussion on the value of the Barbados dollar or the currency, the what we spend every day. So yeah. So as usual, we always start out the program with a quote from the Living Bible. So a randomly selected page, Nigel, no bias. Randomly selected page, no bias.
Mhm.
Mm,
It's a 442.
right. Well, ironically, the page landed at 224, page 224 of the Living Bible, and it landed at the book of Ruth.
Okay.
Ruth. And it said, and it landed right at Ruth chapter 1. Right? Yeah, that beginning.
Hmm.
So it said, long ago when judges ruled in Israel, a man named Elimelech, you know, from Bethlehem, left the country because of a famine and moved to the land of Moab. With him were his wife Naomi and his two sons, Malon and Chilion, during the time of their residence there. He died, and then Naomi, the mother, was left with two sons. So these two young men then went on to marry girls, and the mother was left alone with her husband, and she decided to return to Israel with her daughters-in-law, for she had heard that the Lord had blessed his people by giving them good crops again. Okay, so they returned into the land where they flee from famine. But after they had begun their homeward journey, she changed her mind and said to her two daughters-in-law, why don't you return to your parents' homes instead of coming with me? And may the Lord reward you for your faithfulness to your husband and to me. And may he bless you with another happy marriage. Then she kissed them, and they all broke down and cried. No, no, they said, we want to go with you to your people. But Naomi, the mother, said, it is better for you to return to your own people. Do I have younger sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to have a husband. And even if that were possible, and you can't pregnant again and bore sons, would you wait for them to grow up? No, of course not, my daughters. For how I grieve for you that the Lord has punished me in a way that injures you. Right? So it would end there. So whatever wisdom, you know, for it to be derived from that passage, um, let it be. Self-development, a moment for self-development as usual, Major. We go to the good book. The book by You good, Doctor? Thanks, Lord. So, random page, my brother, as usual. Nigel,
172.
172. So, could you hear me clearly?
Again, a little bit of static, but I can hear you clearly.
Is it clear now?
Go ahead, talk.
Yeah. So, if I'm getting any static, just let me know. Coming through the microphone. Alternate viewers, let me know if my mic is clear. So,
Still
could
getting
you?
a little bit of static.
Okay, uh, 1 second. Let me try to fix that. All right. Are you getting any more static?
No static, but you're low.
Um, Let me know if you can hear me well. Should be fine or fine by now.
Still very low. Can hear you, but still very low.
Hearing me well, Nigel? Or are you muffled? Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear. No.
Better. Better no.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for that. So,
Absolutely.
random number, sir.
172.
172 from the good book. 172 of the good book says, know your true self. As has been emphasized throughout this book so far, it is critically important for us to know one true self and choose to live out of the same self-esteem. In knowing yourself in this content, you must focus on achieving an understanding of your capabilities, competencies, knowledge, and skills acquired through learning, and attributes. These are defined as personal dispositions that largely have their origins in our personality type and individual efforts to cultivate personal and people-centered qualities. Both of these are essential measures to performing our job responsibilities at a high level of productivity. They must be clearly understood as we approach the selection and performance of work roles. Having a comprehensive understanding of who we truly are is the best guide to finding the most suited employment opportunities. It helps us to identify a fit versus a right fit, versus a best fit as it relates to choosing a job. This issue is very important. This issue is very important since if we are not sure who we are, chances are that we will end up choosing employment more out of need than that of the commitment to create a right fit situation based on our knowing ourselves and understanding the demands of the role we are pursuing. Yes. So the good book, know your true self. So thank you, dear Bart, for the wisdom. And let us dive right into tonight's discussion. Let us acknowledge some of the persons on the live stream earlier. So connect to Fabian Yard. Welcome, 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 Fabian Yard. Thank you from all the way in St. John. Um, Big respects to Fabian. Big respects to Mystic Angel. Welcome and thank you for signing on. Tyrone Nurse is saying, good evening, the viewers and panel. I look forward to hearing and having an education. Thank you very much, Tyrone. We appreciate you signing on all the way over there in Canada, my brother. We appreciate you. We appreciate you from all over there. Thank you very much. Sir Alfred Benjamin, from all the way in the US, is saying, good night, Kemar, Nigel, and viewers. So good night to you, Sir Alfred Benjamin. Caribbean girl, good night. I'm hoping that our mic is fixed now and you can hear me well. So good night to you. Good night to Romeo Hickson. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Romeo, for tuning on. Lemuel Toe, thank you, Lemuel, for tuning on. We usually get some great contributions from you, Lemuel, so we look forward to those contributions from you. Good night to Lawrenson Pierre. He says, this is, hey, may God send in a correction what he means here. But good night to you, Lawrenson. Great to have you on the program. Victoria's Queen is saying good night to Kemar, and yes. So you want to give a good shout out to the people on, Nigel?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Good night, everybody. I said earlier, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here early. And we're ready to get into this discussion today about our Barbados dollar.
So since you would have mentioned, Nigel, about the Barbados dollar, and that is the discussion tonight. What do you understand by the title? You know, what jumps out to you about the title? As a Barbadian living abroad, you know, could you give us your perspective on the Barbadian dollar?
Well, it's always been said, the 2 to 1 is something that we're very proud of. The fact that the US dollar, we could use that as doubled in Barbados, and as someone living in the US, that is something that is of benefit as someone in the diaspora. When I come back, I'll be able to have more flexibility economically. But based on the title, you give three different options there: currency devaluation, dollarization, or depreciation. I'm very interested in hearing about each one of those and how that would impact or affect the spending power that somebody like me internationally would have in Barbados. And then furthermore, how that would affect people on the island.
Mhm. But what do you understand by a currency devaluation?
Currency devaluation. So that is where, from my understanding, and correct me where I'm wrong, where the government chooses to devalue the dollar based on, in comparison to what it's pegged to. So based on Barbados standards, we're pegged to the US dollar. So $1, $2 billion. Right? If a currency devaluation happens, now that would turn into like a $4 or $5 to $1. The impacts of that I'm not too familiar with, but that's as far as I'm aware of currency devaluation.
Fair enough, fair enough. So let us have a look, Nigel, to dive into this evening's discussion. So let me just give a big shout out to the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute, who's a big proponent of dollarization. You're going to hear some perspectives tonight based off literature and comments made by some persons within the institute on dollarization and the future of uh, Caribbean currencies, basically.
Hmm.
So I am trying to get something for you to see here, but well, having some challenges with that. So just gonna have to speak to you. But you are right when you say that the Barbados dollar was 2 to 1. Right? So two Barbados dollars, um, one US dollar. On some days that is $1.98, and within the hotel industry they have specific rates that they could sell foreign currency at. So mainly the persons who hold foreign currency in Barbados major would be the commercial banks, right? Hotels. Hotels have the legal, you know, the legal permission to trade foreign currency. Um, but foreign currency is not widely available in Barbados. So when you were here, or you have your family back home, you have any people you interact with back home. When you are back home, you will know that you spend Barbados dollars when you're here,
Right.
but there's no legal market. I'm not saying legal, but there's no big market for US dollars. There's no legal market for US dollars. So I would ask you a simple question. Do you see an appetite for US dollars being spent within the Barbados economy on a day-to-day basis for just general transactions?
No, I don't. People typically would like to buy US if you're traveling with US just to have it or to be able to resell it. However, in terms of the use on a day-to-day basis in their transactions, no. It will still stick to the Bayesian dollar.
Well, let's just say that the availability or more spaces become available to spend US dollars, right, within the Barbadian circuit. So there's this thing called duty free in Barbados, where tourists come into Barbados and when issuing a passport, they get goods within the Barbados space duty free once they're paying in US currency. Right? Now, some people cry that it is unfair that a tourist could come to Barbados and get things cheaper than us within our country, right? And some people argue that it should be the reverse. That, you know, if you're a tourist and you come to my country, you should be the one paying the extra for the goods, as opposed to me who's living here and can't get duty free. So what really is duty free, right? So the duty free market is basically a parallel market or like an underground market. Um, Not really say underground, but more parallel market for foreign exchange. Right? So let's just say the duty free market was opened up to Barbadians. And so if you get access to foreign currency, you could come and buy goods duty free from within specific shops around Bridgetown, specific at Sheraton. Would you see that being a feasible idea?
Feasible for who is the question I will ask. If for the Barbadian populace, I suppose so, but no, in the in securing the actual US dollar now, how where are the options they have to purchase US dollars so that they can now take advantage of these duty free options? So it left me with another question and come to a full conclusion in my mind.
Could you repeat the question, please?
So the question will be, okay, if it is in the benefit of the Barbadian people to have access to duty free shopping, how now would they go about in common terms to get US dollars? Where would they get that from if not from somebody traveling, if not purchasing from a hotel or purchasing from the airport?
Well, that is a simple fix. Banks and financial institutions would then be given the permission to to trade foreign exchange within the economy. So you can access the foreign exchange either from a friend who has it or from a bank or any type of institution which would have a permit to sell that foreign exchange locally.
Okay, copy that. Copy that. Do you think it's in the benefit of the Bayesian people to have access to that, to the duty free shopping?
Well, I guess duty free and measure in the sense that duties are a discretionary thing. So duties are applied um, via legislation, and usually those duties are at the discretions of customs and other people. So some people pay more duties than some. Duties is not equal tax, right? So for example, Barbadians had access to more duty-free days, duty-free tax days, I believe it would definitely drive economic activity locally. So the same way we practice VAT-free days, um, for me, VAT-free day is more of like a marketing tactic and not necessarily, um, I would say, the best bang for buck when it comes to offering economic uh, freedom or like a relief or a tax relief. So if you really wanted to ease the cost of living, you would have duty free day as opposed to VAT free day because duties are where government makes majority of its money. Um, Government actually collects its duties, but with value added tax major, um, businesses are the ones who collect VAT. Yes, businesses are the ones who collect VAT, and yeah, so
Understood.
yeah. But you can go on and make your comment.
Okay. Well, furthermore, on the currency devaluation, as far as my research shows up, if that was supposed to be the choice that happens in Barbados, some of the pros would be boosts in tourism competitiveness. That would just mean that people abroad would have more spending power in Barbados. Their dollars would be more impactful in Barbados because think about it now. Let's say it was from 2 to 1 to 10 to 1. So that means someone in the US, their money will be much stronger in Barbados. However, uh, that would now incur some very high importation inflation in Barbados. One of the other pros of currency devaluation would be reduced trade tariffs. That's something that we would dive deeper in. And then it also promotes export. So those are three things that you could consider as pros if we go in the direction of currency devaluation. I repeat it again: a boost in tourism competitiveness, it promotes export, and it reduces trade tariffs. The cons, which should be imported inflation, your savings and wages as Barbadians would be uh, severely diminished as the value of it has now dropped. Um, and then we will have a lot of debt servicing problems. These are things that we have spoken about on alternative views at length, and we can see that impact happening on a daily basis. So I won't go so far as to say as it's trending to that capacity, but those are the things that are concerning currency devaluation for us on the island. Anything to add to that, Mr. Stewart?
Um, well, let me just put. You can hear me clearly, right? Right. So let me.
Speak a little louder. There you
Wait,
go.
could you? Wait, could you hear me clearly?
Yes, yeah, I got you covered.
Right. So the issue there is that I wouldn't say the currency is being. Um, you need to choose the word carefully. There are two types of devaluation: an internal devaluation and an external devaluation. Right. Now, before we get to the point of actual devaluation or currency depreciation, there's a couple of things that happens before, right? So there's a concept in finance, there's a concept in economics called uh, account foreign account liberalization, or basically like the freeing up or the relaxing of restrictions on foreign exchange in the country. Right? So Y'all could recall when the government of Barbados passed legislation in the parliament. This was around 2018 or so, and this legislation actually allowed Barbadians to walk around with an increase of approximately 10,000 US dollars, right? Approximately 10,000 US dollars. So wherever you needed a permit to have foreign exchange within the country, um, so that you wouldn't be charged, without being in contravention of the Exchange Controls Act. So here's it, a publication by the Central Bank of Barbados, which says here, Nigel, that the Central Bank of Barbados has increased the annual allowance for both travel holidays and travel business to the foreign equivalent of 20,000 Barbados or 60,000 per year, respectively. So these changes are part of a broader adjustment to Barbados's exchange control regime, which also includes making it easier for Barbadian residents to open foreign currency accounts. Right now, this sounds good. Right, this sounds good. That we have access to foreign currency accounts. We could do more foreign currency transactions. Um, yeah, it sounds good, but this is the beginner stages of what you call a currency, or the erosion, or on the first or the precursor step to a devaluation. Right. So remember, I told you that it started at $10,000. Right? It started at $10,000. Then it goes up to $20,000. Then it goes up to $30,000. Then it goes up to $100,000. Right. So you have persons now, right? Um, you're creating basically we call it a black market for foreign exchange in Barbados, right? When you allow the threshold of foreign exchange that the average person could have with it on their person, right? So we heard the governor of the Central Bank of Barbados saying that there's approximately 4.4 billion Barbadian dollars in circulation within our economy, right? He said that there was $4.4 billion of Barbadian currency within the Barbados economy, right? Which means that the how much over 287,000 Barbadians, we compete for roughly that amount of money daily, right? So that is what's on our wallets. That's probably was on our beds. That's probably was in our bank accounts. Right. So when you start to remove, Nigel, or basically like debase a currency, right? You reduce the amount of dollars in circulation. Like it's called monetary contraction. So there's monetary expansion and monetary contraction. So monetary expansion is basically printing money, right? Printing money. So you will print money to be able to expand goods and services, print money to open businesses, print money to, whatever. Some governments print money to pay bills, which is never advised, pay wages, which is never advised, right? But that's called monetary expansion or fiscal expansion. So when you start to debase a currency, like when you reduce the amount of dollars, Barbadian dollars in circulation, and you're saying on the other hand, well, we're going to give people access to more foreign currency. That is essentially what you call dollarization, right? Dollarization. So remember, the Barbados dollar is tied to the US dollar, right? It's tied 2 to 1. So for the equivalent Barbados dollars, there's supposed to be, if you cut that in half, if it's 4.4, if you cut that in half, I can't give you the exchange rate if it's 1.98 or 2, but if you cut that in half, approximately 2 billion and some US dollars, right? So when you start to debase the Barbadian dollar, right, when you reduce the amount of Barbadian dollars in circulation, simultaneously increasing the amount of US dollars in circulation by saying to people, well, hey, you can have more US on your person, the banks can trade more US. We're going to increase the threshold that the central bank allows for trade, and you can trade more without coming to us for permission, and increasing the volume of US dollar trades. That's basically dollarization, right? Which then leads to the next element that we want to discuss, which is currency depreciation, right?
Mhm.
So remember, we started by saying a devaluation comes in two forms: an internal devaluation and the external devaluation. We're going to break down both, right? So we explain to the public what we mean, right? After the internal or the external devaluation, and you start to debase the currency and allow more US dollars to be spent, more US transactions, encouraging more online transactions, buying from Amazon, buying from, Nigel, anytime you're using the system, the SWIFT system, and you're having an increased volume of US transactions, are you encouraging your citizens to do more US transactions and less Barbadian dollar transactions? That is dollarization. So to an extent, the Barbados economy is already dollarized, right? So the further you dollarize, essentially giving persons more and more access to more foreign currency, it would essentially depreciate the base currency, which is the Barbados dollar, and put more pressure on it. So a simple example, look at the foreign reserves that we have, right? Look at the foreign reserves that we have today, right? We have the highest level of foreign reserves in Barbados, right? In 2018, Nigel, um, and I could take a quote from Alternative Views, right? But in 2018, Nigel, there was a big discussion about the foreign reserves in Barbados being at US 220 million at May 2018. Right? The reserves went up to approximately, right, like the reserves went up to approximately 1.2 billion, and today they're over, as I said, they're over $2 billion, right? Or close to 2 billion, a little bit over $2 billion. Right? So the more, the more foreign reserves you have, like, because you're borrowing them, right? The more foreign reserves the country has by borrowing, then the government has to look for more and more and more, or earn more and more and more and more Barbadian dollars, right? Which are earned through taxation at most, right? We know that the government or Barbados does not, and even if we say Barbados, many Caribbean economies do not earn foreign exchange in terms of surplus, right? They don't earn, so tourism does not give us record earnings that we could pay off all the bills and still have excess revenue. International business does not do that for us. Sugarcane does not do that for us. So Barbados and many Caribbean countries do not have a money earner. We're still very much uh lax on exports. Our exports does not earn us enough value. So the income on our from the foreign exchange side comes from borrowing. Right? So Barbados being under the IMF stabilization program, right? Entered into the plan. Part of it was to top up the reserves. So we borrowed with the reserves and I topped it up. So what was interesting about that is that in the transition between governments, we had what we call monetary expansion happening between 2013 and 2018. So the government was printing excessive amounts of Barbadian dollars, Nigel, right? So while printing those excessive amounts of Barbadian dollars, you will see that the foreign reserves were decreasing and decreasing and decreasing and decreasing and decreasing until they got to US 220 million. Right? So in the change of administration, you saw the reserves go back up, right? You see the foreign reserves go back up. So automatically, Nigeria, you would know that the monetary expansion, then you would have to do the reverse, which is the contract, which is to extract all of the excessive money that was printed between those years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how does a country go about extracting excess credit, or what we call the economists called domestic credit? How does a country extract all of this printed money, all this excessive money back out of the economy? Right? So that is the reason for the BERT IMF program, right? To extract the excessive credit that was printed between that time. So how do you extract it? Via increases in taxation, Nigel, right?
Before you go
Via
too far,
increases in tax.
before you go too far, just
Mhm.
so, because the topic you're talking about right now is dollarization, right? And
Right.
just for understanding purposes, dollarization in general refers to a country adopting a foreign currency, which means it will no longer locally have their own. But what you're saying, even to get to that, is not immediate. There's a process in which that happens. And what you're describing right now is the process in which that is trending towards, whether it be the internal or
Yes.
the external.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
Just making sure
So
this ain't my forte, so I just trying to follow along. So I got you covered. Carry on, carry on.
yeah. Yes. 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 So where was I? Where was I? Where was I?
You was talking about
So
now the IMF taxation and the BERT
ah
program.
wait. Right. So to extract the excessive domestic credit or the excessive printed money, right? The expansion, the monetary expansion that occurred, right? You had to create what we call a stabilization program, right? To stabilize or to bring back what we call balance or equilibrium in the economy. So the equilibrium would basically be how much domestic credit, which is the size of the economy, like how much money people compete for. So the governor said it was 4.4 billion,
Mhm.
right? Um, the expansion, as you know, would it was more than that in 2018. So obviously it would have been reduced, contracted along the years via the stabilization program and the implementation of the various taxes. So those taxes would have been garbage and sewage tax, increases in land tax, increases in VAT, and increases in any other taxes that the fuel tax, corporation tax, tax on Amazon goods. All of these various taxes are what we call extractive measures, right? So they're taking money from the people, which will obviously reduce the amount of money that is within circulation, right? That is within circulation in the economy. So this equilibrium or this balance, Nigel, right, where you have the Barbadian dollar amount, governor saying 4.4 billion, and then you have the US dollar amount, and you need to achieve that balance to ensure that there's no lopside. You know, like you don't have one of too much of the other. You don't have too much US dollars or Barbadian dollars, right? All governments, irrespective of party, this is another party, but all governments have to make choices, basically. Like so, Professor Michael Howard, Nigel, of Barbados, right, would have argued in his book about stabilization policy, the IMF program. He gave us some things to look for. Um, he gave us some things to look for, and he said in the book that He said, I will now outline the main components of a typical IMF stabilization program. He said, abolition or liberalization of foreign exchange and import controls, right? So that's basically the same thing we discussed earlier, the relaxing of foreign exchange controls, right? Meaning that you don't have to get as much permissions from the central bank as necessary. The police don't necessarily, or the fraud squad don't necessarily charge you for having foreign exchange over a certain amount if they catch you with it. Um, Banks are allowed to do way more lenient transactions. People have access to more foreign currency, right? And that, again, that's the process of dollarization, right? So foreign currency liberalization, i.e., almost like dollarization, the relaxing of import controls, Nigel. So making it easier for the merchants and the big conglomerates, right? But not relaxing, sorry, tightening up, sorry, of the merchants. So stopping the merchants from importing certain goods, rationing, cutting back on foreign exchange, tightening up. Um, in terms of saying, well, you can only import these goods. So they give you the access, but then regulate what you can and cannot buy. You see it?
Mhm. Mhm.
Hey, so that's one observation. He then went on to observe about exchange rate devaluation. Right? Exchange rate devaluation. So you remove the peg from 2 to 1 and move it to about 5 to 1, 7 to 1, 1 US, 7 Barbados dollars, 1 US, 8 Barbados dollars, etc. Right? He also went on to say local or domestic policies, including control over how the central bank gives loans to the government. Right? So we spoke about the printing of money or the monetary expansion, right, Nigel?
Mhm.
So the government controls the central bank, and the government will instruct the central bank to print $50 million worth of money and ask the central bank to buy $50 million worth of bonds in government paper, right? But not government debt. So the government is borrowing directly from the central bank. So that process of borrowing from the central bank is what occurred between the process of 2012, 2013, between 2018, right, where the government was excessively lenient on the central bank to be buying up its debt because they didn't have that many creditors who were willing to lend you the money, so you had to rely on the central bank. So under stabilization program, you see that benefit being reduced, and central banks have to cut the appetite or cut the rate that they lend to governments. We saw that happen in Barbados in 2020 when the Central Bank Act was amended to cap the amount and the percentage that the Central Bank of Barbados can lend to government. Right. So another correct observation. He also spoke about the increase in indirect taxation. Like taxation. So indirect taxation, Nigel, is levies, fees, charges at the hospital, fees at school, you know, and these little minor fees, not necessarily increases in like income tax or corporate tax or these direct taxes, but more the indirect side, right? So value added tax and these type of things, they will increase those. Right? So that is another accurate observation. He spoke about wage restraints, right? Wage restraints and the holding back of wages, right? So capping the wages, um, not attaching wages to the growth of productivity. So if the economy grows by 3%, um, the unions could offer 0%, right? Often not matching the wages to the rate of growth that the economy grows at. That's also a factor. So not to go on about that, Nigel, but um,
So these would all be what you just listed. would be cons of dollarization, negative impacts or perceived negative impacts, depending on your point of view.
No, these are not impacts of dollarization. Um, these are impacts of the stabilization program and the rebalancing of the economy, right? So remember, I spoke about US dollars, US dollar reserves, and the
Mhm.
amount of Barbadian dollars in circulation. And when you try to achieve that equilibrium, the extractive policies, Nigel, the extractive policies would give you the devaluation,
Mhm.
right? The extractive policies of the stabilization program will give you a devaluation. So I think you would better understand it, and you can do this. You could type in what is an internal devaluation.
I'm sorry, get that for the people.
So time
So,
Nigel pulls that up. Um, I just want to read a comment or two. Um, Somebody said our dollar is being devalued every day. Um, we'll see if that's true by the end of the show. Sean Cool said if they devalue the Barbados dollar, I want my boss pay me in US dollars. Mhm. Uh, Spirit Force said, Mr. Franklin, you're not lying. The Bajans used to go to Trinidad in numbers to shop when the dollar devalue. Not me. To Guyana when the dollar devalue. Fabian said the $100 is $50. Victorine Franklin is saying good night, family. So good night to you. Sean Cool said not quite Kemar Barbados still got capital controls. Um, but that is the point that I am making. If the capital controls continue to be eroded and systemically eroded, that is comfortably the path to dollarization, right? Where you have more access to foreign currency and therefore there's less need to go after Barbados dollars. So it is a gradual process to dollarization and not an immediate process of just wiping 4 point something billion out of the Barbados economy in Barbadian currency to say, hey, everybody just spend US dollars from tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. It's a gradual process. Um, yeah, but over to you, Nigel.
all right. Internal devaluation is an economic policy where a country aims to regain competitiveness without reducing the value of its currency. What you were just speaking to. Instead, it focuses on lowering labor costs, often through wage cuts and increasing productivity. This approach is sometimes used as an alternative to a more traditional devaluation, where the currency's value is directly lowered. Okay. So based on that explanation, that is exactly what is going on presently. So the three things that they mentioned was it focuses on lowering labor costs, and often through wage cuts and increasing productivity. So based on what you said, Kimon, this lines up exactly. You're muted.
I want you to read what an internal devaluation is one more time.
All right, there we
Like just
go.
one more time.
An internal devaluation is an economic policy where a country aims to regain competitiveness without reducing the value of its currency. Instead, it focuses on lowering labor costs, often through wage cuts, and increasing productivity. This approach is sometimes used as an alternative to a more traditional devaluation, where the currency's value is directly lowered. So
Or
is an alternative with the goal of the same thing in mind. However, it just is rolled out differently.
yeah, yeah. So let me coloring some picture for you as the choice and economic choice. Now, I watched an interview with the governor of the Central Bank of Barbados, and he was speaking to a reporter. I think her name was Lisa Lord, and he brought up the conversation about external devaluation because external devaluation is always a conversation when dealing with the IMF. And he said on the interview that external devaluation is always a choice in IMF programs. But the Barbados Prime Minister had indicated that it is Barbados' choice, a firm choice, to not go the route of external devaluation. Right? But again, you're on the IMF stabilization program. Right? So if you don't do the external devaluation, then you have to go the route of the internal devaluation, which comes in the form, Nigel, of cuts, expenditure cuts, reductions of budgets, right? In the bid of reducing the money supply, right? Reducing the amount of Barbadian dollars available in the system, right? So remember we spoke about the Barbadian component of the economy, the dollar value, then we spoke about the US value, right? So the internal devaluation aims at reducing the amount of money being circulated within the Barbados economy. Right? So let me read from Alternate Views, the book. Right? Alternate Views, the book. I am reading from page 108. Right? I am reading from page 108. And it says here that the government has confirmed its commitment to avoiding an external devaluation of the exchange rate peg of Barbados from 2 to 1. And the continued bolstering of foreign reserves stemmed from the loss of foreign exchange earnings within the travel and tourism industry. COVID and the tourists weren't coming and the airplanes weren't coming, right? So, so foreign reserves were going up all along during COVID, right? So I argued that the increased foreign reserves only assisted in benefiting those persons who use foreign exchange, right? So who uses foreign exchange within the Barbados economy mainly are large sums of foreign exchange, the merchants, the traders, the banks, the hotels, the big conglomerates, the big private sector, right? The average man doesn't use foreign exchange unless he's ordering a good offline for Amazon or, you know, small business or so. But yeah, so the increased foreign reserves only benefits the major users of foreign exchange. So then they went on to say that without linking this increase in foreign reserves to a local domestic policy to increase the possibilities of locals, right, Barbadians, benefiting and earning income from these increased foreign reserves, well, it would be an expense on the people of Barbados. I went on to say that this will place a severe burden on an already overtaxed and a shrinking tax base, right? Because the more borrowed foreign reserves, the greater the adjustment must be made locally, Nigel. So you see it's coming back again. So the more foreign exchange you have in the country, or the more foreign exchange you have in Barbados, right? The greater adjustment must be made locally on the Barbadian dollar side, right? So the more foreign reserves go up, the more you have to seek to reduce the amount of Barbadian dollars in circulation to create what you call equilibrium, right? So it doesn't be out of balance. So That is the reason for adjustment and stabilization programs to bring economies back into balance. So here's Barbados increasing foreign reserves. So therefore, if foreign reserves continue to go up, the Barbadian money supply should be going down, right? So it went on to say that the greater the adjustment must be made locally, and the Barbadian taxpayer will be required to pay higher prices to bring the economy back into balance. And any ease in adjustment will have to come from government intervention, right? So the choice to keep the external 2-to-1 peg in place comes with measures to make an adjustment efforts to make on the local front in the form of an internal devaluation. Right here at page 109, the choice to keep the external peg in place comes with measures to make adjustments on the local front in the form of an internal devaluation. So it was said on alternate views that the Barbados dollar has not been externally devalued, but it has been internally devalued
Mm.
in a significant way. So I pose a question to the governor of the central bank, who said in his interview with Crystal Hoy, I saw a clip of it on Instagram, where he said that Barbados had $4.4 billion in Barbados dollars in circulation. I challenge the governor of the central bank to say how large the money supply of Barbados was in 2018 before the IMF stabilization program, right? Versus what is today, as he said, which is 4.4 billion in Barbados dollars, right? So if you can see how much Barbadian dollars were in circulation in 2018 versus the 4 point some billion dollars he has now, you will clearly see the size or the magnitude, Nigel, of money that was extracted out of the Barbadian economy, causing it to contract to be much smaller in size, right? Right. That's my question. In case the media wants to ask a question, that's my question that I am putting out there. And that question should be put out there to the relevant authorities for an answer. So I want to say here, alternate viewers, because I hope you're following me closely here tonight. Right? The internal devaluation comes in the form of government reducing labor and the wage bill, reducing funds allocated to ministries, reducing pension monies owed to citizens,
Mhm.
placing caps on social expenditure and investment, right? Engaging in debt restructuring, right? Engaging in debt restructuring. So we all know the debt restructuring, what the debt restructuring is. Basically telling the creditors, well, take a pay cut on what owe you and let's extend the repayment time. So if it was supposed to pay you back next year, at least give me a 5 year grace period, and then it will start repaying you in 5 years, um possibly at a much lower interest rate. So it then allows the government to hold and keep money that they otherwise would have been spending on interest. Right. So that's the debt restructuring. And it also came with an overall reduction and reducing government expenditure that is linked to giving citizens income. Right? So anything giving the citizens income will be reduced. And this move is aimed at reducing purchases and transactions using foreign exchange, Nigel. Right? Using foreign exchange. As it was reported that in 6 months, Barbados had a foreign exchange deficit of $632 million, which then jumped to $958 million in 9 months. So that's close to $1 billion in foreign exchange, Nigel, that the country lost in such a rapid space of time. So to be able to slow down the rate, right, to slow down the rate that we were losing foreign exchange, right, you have to reduce the citizens' income, cut people's money, and cut the spending, right, which will cut the overall appetite, which would slow down the depletion rate of the foreign exchange.
And we were losing we were losing foreign exchange based on the interest rates, which required them to do the debt restructuring.
Right. Yeah, we lose the foreign exchange based off paying back debt, like paying out
Right.
on interest, and
Correct.
yeah,
Okay.
but
All
not
right. We're
necessarily
following
on
you.
the but not necessarily on the restructuring per se, because the
Mhm.
restructuring exercise would have allowed you to keep money and not pay out to the creditors.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right?
Okay. But not pay out immediately, but pay out over time, a longer
Yes,
period of time. Okay.
yes,
Following you.
yes.
Following you. Following you.
So
So you had all this here right in alternative views?
yes, my brother.
Remind me when you published this book again?
This book was published in February of 2022.
2022. And here is 2025, and all these things we living it in the reality. Yeah.
Mhm. So
Okay, man. Alternative views.
let me give you people the last paragraph. That the last paragraph here. It says here that at page 110 that the price increases and inflation, right? The rapid increases in cost of living that is being felt by Barbadians, right, could be attributed to what we call a self-correcting exercise or self-correcting adjustment within the economy due to the loss of income from COVID. So because all of the government taxation levels were down, tax levels were down, income was down, everything was down, Nigel. The government still had to earn income to run, right? So you had to increase prices, right? So everything the price of a good increase, right? Tax collection increases because taxation is charged as a percentage of the price, right? So if the price is $5, well, at least 1% of that tax, right? So if the price go up to $6, you know, you pay 1% of $6. If the price go up to $7, you pay 1% of $7. Right. So the government earns its income via the taxation being charged as a percentage of price. So therefore, as prices continuously increase, here's the incentive for government not to intervene because you government stopping itself from making money.
For sure.
Right? So the absurd inflation rates that Barbados is feeling, the high prices in the supermarket, the high prices for gas, the high prices for water, the high prices for every single thing in this country, right? The government charges a percentage of those high prices, and every time the prices go up, government taxation collection increases, and the more money the government makes, the higher the prices are in the economy. So, do you think that the governments also feel agreed are going to stop prices from going up and going up? No. So, due to that loss of income, alternative viewers, the government not earning that money, it had to correct itself. Prices had to go up. The government made back the money through again indirect taxation, VAT collection, and those type of taxes. So I went on to argue that this signifies, eh, that without the government's intervention, citizens will have to pay overall price increases to bring the economy back. With the restrictions of the IMF endorsed work plan on no increases in subsidies, no borrowing from private markets, legal and economic restrictions on the central bank. If you remember in Professor McHower's book, Nigel, he did say that in observing IMF stabilization programs that you do reduce central bank's ability to lend the government's credit. Remember we
Correct.
discussed that. Go. So here is it in alternate views. Right. Um, right. So legal and economic restrictions on central bank and in national insurance, especially, right, as there are hardly any other options for the government to increase their income at this time without going on the barrage increases of taxes. Right. So increased prices or inflation, the high cost of living at this point is the way that the government can collect increased income without overall increases in the taxation rates. Since again, taxation is charged as a percentage of price. At increased prices will increase collection rates, right? And the continued increases in debt to the international institutions like the IMF and so will become burdensome to the taxpayer, right? Due to increases in interest payments and a decrease in overall productive activity within the economy because of the rapid price increases and cost of living. So the local demand for goods and services will continue to be depressed and cut down by high unemployment, reduced work hours, price increases across the board. Right. So for example, gas prices, supermarket goods, utilities, etc., 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 etc. So any comments from the alternate viewers? Could you send in a comment and let us know what we're saying on here is completely accurate? You observe what we're saying to be true in your everyday life. Now let me repeat that last sentence one more time. Local demand for goods and services continues to be depressed by high unemployment, reduced work hours, price increases across the board, right? And an overall reduction in productive activity as debt to the international financial institutions increased, interest payments increase, and overall price increases occurring again across the board, and government revenue continues to go up and increase. While income via the government side continues to be cut to the people. Reductions in ministries, the downsizing of ministries, the privatization of state-owned assets, cuts in pension, changes in the national insurance, debt restructurings. There's it all, Nigel. So any
Hmm.
thoughts from you, my brother?
Well, they all lining up from many different spaces and places. One, alternate views. The good doctor writing in his book. Um, it is interesting how this is all turning out and how it was predicted. Uh, you know, I wonder if they had read your book earlier, you think anything would be different?
Well, I will deliver this book to government MPs. I delivered this book to the director of the IMF. I gave this book to many significant persons within Barbados over and abroad. This book was also the benefactor of, and the podcast. This podcast it was the benefactor of the Emergent Venture Award, Ireland 2024. Um, so yeah, one of my first sales of this book was to a government parliamentarian. Believe it or
Mm,
not.
okay.
Hey,
Yeah. So
um,
being recognized on such an international stage, emergent ventures, that gives and adds a lot of credibility to what you have written in this book. Uh, Based on your observation, has any of it been taken into consideration and implemented anywhere across government that you can see?
well, I could see. Yes, I saw a lot of what is in alternate views being utilized in government policy. Um, this book, I also donated a copy of this book to the Parliamentary Library of Barbados. So this book is kept in the Parliamentary Library. Right? and it's also available where you're. So I don't know who took it and read it or who's reading it, but that is the reason why we wrote it, for it to be a benefactor to the country, right?
Absolutely.
So it, if you look at the book, back of the book, it says that this educational and highly informative publication is an excellent tool for budding economists, politicians, public servants, and the general public who desire an understanding of the Barbados economy in a modern era.
Mm.
So yes,
Mm. Okay. Okay. It is interesting that we have that to point at, to see in real life what was written is coming to fruition. Um,
yeah,
I would encourage everybody to pick up the book, man. Alternate views. This is the real deal. This isn't a jokey book. This is the real deal. So the topic was dollarization, right? And the journey in which we take to get to dollarization, the internal devaluations versus the external devaluations, what each of those look like. Um, and based on everything said, everything presented, we took the path of internal devaluation, whereas external devaluation would have taken the peg of 2 to 1 to something else, 10 to 1, whatever that would have become. Uh, do you think the Barbadian people are fully aware of that is the process that they're on, the journey in which they're going to, or is it a more, well, this is what government tell you, this is what we're going with?
well, I mean, it's not a dictatorship. Well, let me not say that. It's supposed to be a democracy, right? So we don't have a dictatorship in Barbados per se, where there are no elections. We still have elections, so it's not classified a full dictatorship in a sense. No, so governments have to consider the popularity factor with the people, and also what makes sense for the country. So governments have to become re-elected. So often, what is the right thing to do may not be done because it may be an unpopular decision to make that could cost with the government. So good advice. So good advice, um, economic advice, good strong economic advice could be ignored for political expediency. Right. So right now, this process of internal devaluation is marketed, right? Is marketed to the people through the BERT program or the IMF BERT program, right? And it's being sold as a savior for the country. It's being sold as the best thing ever, and that going through this experience would, stabilize the economy, and it would bring confidence, and it would help us to go back to. So it's being sold as a champion, hey. But if the people really understood it from the alternate views perspective as to how we put it over, to realize that, well, look, we might not have the external devaluation, we might not have a 2 to 1. We still have a Barbados dollar 2 to 1, but the spending power that you have is being systemically eroded every day, right? So you may have, you may get a wage increase, a wage increase of however percent. Um, However, the cost of living and the inflation is eating, and it is growing at a rate that's significantly higher than your wage increase, right? So if the cost of living is growing at a more rapid rate than your wage increase, well, you're still back at square zero, right? So the people are complaining it's so expensive. You're getting less things for the money. And once upon a time, you used to get 8 bags for $100, and now we can only get 2 bags. That is called an internal devaluation, where you're cutting the people's spending power and you're cutting the people's appetite, right? and you're cutting the rate that they consume, Nigel, because you don't want the foreign reserves, right? You don't want the foreign reserves to be depleted at a rate or a much quicker rate than you can manage. So, because Barbados is borrowing at such a rapid rate, we have to slow down our borrowing appetite. But if the merchants and store continue to use excessive foreign reserves at a much quicker rate than they can be replaced, then they're going to dwindle.
Mm.
Hmm? So I don't know much, or I don't know at the time, or I don't know. I don't blame the people. I don't blame the people. All I will say is that the persons who were tasked, or who are tasked to bring the education to the people, right, and to fill in the gaps and to make the people much wiser as the government policy of the day, they're not doing it. Right? So the persons who have the skills, who are paid highly, who have the big degrees and all of these things, um, they are often on the payroll, often not interested. Um, yeah, but let me just say this though: there are some good soldiers in the fight. So I saw economists like Anthony Wood. I saw economists like Carlos Fort. I saw economists like Professor Michael Howard. At one time, I saw Jeremy Stephen. I saw Antonio Alain. I see a couple of economists. I saw Anki Scott Joseph, Dr. Anki Scott Joseph. So I saw a couple of economists out there speaking, Nigel, and
Mhm.
trying to help bring some clarity to these issues. However, there's where alternate views comes in. They're trying to bridge the disconnect between the, you know, the high up in the air news and trying to bring it down to a perspective where average man, average minded man, and average minded people could get in the conversation and have a contribution to make.
Because they're the ones who are effective most. They need to have a say in it all as well. So let
Yes.
me ask you this. All this sounds very dire. Sounds like, it's not easy road to travel right now. Now, let me ask you this. Is there an alternative view of this where there are pros where you could look at this information and find a way to say, well, okay, I see the impacts of this, but what is the overall goal? What is it trending towards? Because you gotta be hopeful that it's trending towards something good. Is that the direction that is going, or can you add some clarity to that for the people?
Based off the trajectory that we are taking as a country, we are intended to move away from doing trade with the US dollar and to do a strategic shift in alliances, trade alliances. So Barbados signed on to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and therefore Barbados is trying to strategically align its trade interests with that of China.
Mhm.
But on alternate views, we discuss the monopoly or the stronghold that America has on our trade trade in the economy right now. Right? We have a very large deficit with America compared to China. Right? So we are trying to change again allegiances, but it's something more easily said than done because again most world transactions are done on the SWIFT system, the SWIFT payment system, right? And the SWIFT payment system is dominated by the US dollar, the US petrodollar, as a accepted world currency. Now, nobody goes anywhere in the world and says, well, I want to do some business. You could give me Chinese currency, like, or let's trade it in Chinese currency, or let's trade it in Russian currency, or so you might get rid of euros if you are in Europe, right? But the US dollar is still the worldwide accepted currency. Not saying that the Chinese yen can't get there at some point in time, or some other currency can't get there at some point in time, but for the foreseeable future, the US dollar is still very much dominant. Right?
Mhm.
So I saw an article from Professor Justin Robinson today in the media, and Professor Robinson was praising the government's economic strategy. Right? So let me try to get that up here. Professor Justin Robinson. Right. So he is saying here, it says call for an urgent response to tariffs. Right. Call for an urgent response to tariffs. So here's it, Professor Justin Robinson is saying a call for an urgent response to tariff threats. Right. So he is arguing, Professor, Professor who was also a guest on Alternate Views before. We've had many good discussions with Professor Robinson on here. So we want to share his perspective on US tariff threat. So Professor Robinson is arguing that, and he's warning Barbados, sorry, and the Caribbean are facing multiple threats now that the multilateral trading system has been severely disrupted by the US hike in tariffs. And he's advising governments and businesses in the region to urgently respond to the expected fallout by establishing a strategic framework for resilience that is focused on diversifying export markets, strengthen intra-Caribbean trade agreements, targeted import substitution, and accelerated digital services export and transformation. Right? Now, what is very interesting here, because this article doesn't give you everything, but digital service export and transformation. Right? Digital service and transformation. So I want you to focus on that because you recall on alternate views. You recall on alternate views before. We would have said that there is a situation happening behind scenes between the SWIFT system, right? The SWIFT payment system and the
Mhm. Yeah.
PAPS trading system, the trading system, right? The Pan African trading system. Remember, we went through that extensively on here, right? So for those persons who want to look it up, go in the comments, look at the show that we did on PAPS versus the SWIFT system to get a deeper understanding of where we went with that conversation. So Professor Robertson is basically, or at the core of it, I should say, at the core of it, from my estimation, is argument of the transformation, Nigel, right? The transformation of doing more business and more trade with the new way of, or the new vision for the world. And he went on to say that Barbados and other countries run the risk of being isolated and pushed to one side if they don't catch on to the wave of this new digital payment system, basically,
Mhm.
right? Because the world seems to be going in the way of PAPS. So at some point in time, I am going to pull up PAPS and the volume of transactions that happens on the PAPS system versus the volume of transactions that happens on the SWIFT system, and then we can get a better determination based off analysis and results, you know, where is the direction we need to go. So some experts are arguing, as you see, digital service, digital payment transformation, transforming into a digital payment system away from the US dollar, right? Away from the US dollar, trying to create a system where you don't have to use the US dollar for no type of transactions at all. A digital payment system, a digital currency, right? That is the direction that is being promoted on one side, and then on the other side, you have dollarization, right? You have dollarization, Nigel, and a continuation of the use of the SWIFT system, um, allowing more foreign currency transactions. As was said, you don't have to completely wipe out your domestic monetary base at the same time, but a gradual introduction of more US dollar spend within your economies. Um, Barbados is partially dollarized already. Any country that has payment systems using the SWIFT system, Niger, and spending US dollars, however slight or small, and making and sending and receiving, you're there, you're on it. Right? So, how much disruption will we realize with a changeover? How much disruption will we realize? Or are we prepared for that level of economic disruption within the Caribbean if Barbados had to, make that strategic shift, as using the term, make that strategic shift and undertake this so-called digital transformation on its payment system.
So, on if it was to make that strategic shift, just so that I have this understanding, would it know? Would we now maintain our dollar? Would we still have a Barbados dollar, or would that still trend us towards having a dollarization from another bigger economy, i.e., China or US?
Well, it puts it pushes us on to a digital currency.
Mhm.
Right? So you will get a central bank digital currency, a digital identification. So Barbados recently rolled out the Trident Digital ID, and the Trident Digital ID houses your name, your bank account information, medical records. Everything, every single thing is on this digital ID. So this digital ID was intended to be set up to a central bank digital currency, or like a CBDC digital currency. So the company that set up the central bank digital currency um, test run was a company called Bit, right? A company called Bit, and Bit rolled out a pilot or a test pilot of a digital Barbados dollar called M-Money. Right? So you would go around and you would see M-Money payment schemes at different stores, and the Barbados dollar was being transformed on this M-Money pilot. So M-Money came up for a bit and then it went back down. Mm. So the M-Money pilot, as I said, was intended to be birthed into the digitization of the Barbados dollar,
Mhm.
and eventually the doing away with physical cash onto a completely cashless society, as was announced by the Prime Minister, uh, to take Barbados fully digital, to be a fully digital society by 2030 with a central bank digital currency and a fully digital Barbados dollar, which will essentially be connected to the PAP system, connecting us directly to Africa. So the presence of the African Exim Bank in Barbados is to facilitate that digital transformation and provide that digital infrastructure, the investment into the digital infrastructure to transition the Barbados economy over to that new system and connect it directly to the African system, as all through Africa, right? So many countries in Africa already have digital currencies, have deep digital infrastructure. As I remember, I wrote my economics paper on Rwanda, and Rwanda had like digital payment infrastructure, even on public buses. Right? So Barbados is now attempting to copy that and trying to bring the cashless system to all transport board buses. Right? So there are already examples out there as to the future of Barbados, countries who already went through stabilization processes, African countries who already went underwent this transformation. So Barbados is basically trying to play catch up with the transformation that already occurred in Africa. They try to revolutionize and digitize the systems onto this new payment system and to basically cut out the US dollar out of your daily trade. Where you can end up with somebody else, meaning whoever are the controllers of the PAP system, which I'm not sure who they are, they will now
Mm-hmm.
be, you know, the persons who, yeah.
Okay, okay. Thank you for that extensive breakdown. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just one more question before you shift to something else. So these economies, for example, Rwanda, now that they have been through that stabilization and have been reformed or reimagined into this digital cashless society, what what are the benefits? What are they now living with that they didn't have to live with before? How is living easier or more sustainable now than before? Or is it just I don't want to say paint on a pig, but it looked pretty, but it's still struggling.
Well, the digital penetration of countries like Rwanda and the other African countries, the Ethiopia is set to undergo a deep economic stabilization program now.
Hmm.
Um, the digital penetration in these economies often comes with digital exclusion. Right, so digital exclusion could be broken down in persons who call the unbanked, so persons without access to a bank account, right? And they will classify you not to be a nomad if you don't have
Hmm.
these. If you don't have these facilities, you become like persona non grata basically. So you essentially be locked out to the system, right? So most transactions will happen on your cell phone. So you would pay by the supermarket. Everything if you go to the supermarket, you pay with your cell phone. Catch a bus, you pay with your cell phone. If you do business together, you pay with your cell phone, right? You go into the market to buy goods. Even the people in the market have cell phones. So if you don't have the technology, basically to participate in this new age economy, you're often left out and left behind. So if you get a little bit biblical now, it kind of sounds like the mark of the beast. You know, if you don't get it, you'll not be able to
Hmm.
trade and do
For sure.
business.
I mean, we saw a little bit of that with getting the COVID shot. How you were excommunicated from spaces and places if you didn't sign up for this job.
Yeah.
Okay, understood, understood. That's a very very bleak outlook. To be honest with you, to be honest with you. But let me play. Anyone wants a devil advocate? Let me play angel's advocate. Let me say we do this reform. We become digitized. All the buses know you can use your phone and just tap and go. How much of the Barbadian economy, how much of the Barbadian people realistically will now be left out of that? Because when you're talking technology, you're talking youth, right? Is there any programming, any foresight in place to bring these older people up to scratch, to bring people who may not be technologically savvy into that space? Or is it just, well, if you in it, you in it. If you're in, well, you fear for yourself and you figure it out.
Well, what is interesting about the African economies is that the average age is significantly lower. Right? So Africa has a huge youth population. So
Mhm.
therefore, the technology is present within those groups. Right? Um, Most of the persons who I would consider to be special groups, those persons who can't be included, right? there are some special facilities governments will put in place. So, an example of that in Barbados right now, they're giving out this $300 cash allowance, right? And for persons who don't have a bank account, they're still going to pay you by the check. Now, the amount of people who have to receive by check is not going to be that high, right? Because most people who working should have had a bank account from before, right? Hardly anybody get paid in cash nowadays. Not saying that you don't have some exceptions, but in most instances, once you have a job, you more than likely have to have a bank account. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So for those persons who don't have it, you will find some type of state arrangement or so government approved that you could still be able to get through temporarily, but eventually they're going to shut that window to try to encourage everybody to get the technology. So within the same government program rolling out the $300, the government is asking for a national ID, and they have in uh, brackets, preferably the trader ID,
Mm-hmm.
not the passport, not your passport, not ID in general, but preferably trader ID. So here they are encouraging people in a very subtle way to go and get the technology, go and get the trader ID, go and get your bank account pinned to the ID, because again, government government on their so, so-called digital transformation drive to bring us into a cashless society, not just going from what was said by the authorities. Yeah.
Okay. Copy that. Copy that. Thank you for that answer. Thank you for that answer. Um, you want to take in some comments now? We've had some lively conversation here. See what you're saying. Again, thank you for all the alternate viewers joining. Like, share, and subscribe. Share, share, share. Like. It helps with the engagement. It helps our audience to engage with us further. It helps us to spread further in the algorithm. So like, share, and subscribe. Perpetual Jamont says, "Is dictatorship bad?" It depends on who you're asking. Monarchies are described as dictatorships. I think the world still runs on monarchies, but just hidden hands, or as you would call them, oligarchs or oligarchy. Well, Mark Gibson says US currency is heading for a devaluation. America and its finance system is heading for a collapse, which is going to follow behind Canada, UK, and various European countries, to name a few. Okay. So if that alternative view is in fact true, would it mean that we're ahead of the curve and looking to align with Africa and the Africa Exim Bank? Let's see. Uh, DILAC 95. Are economic policies largely directed by outside forces? That is true. Sean Cool. It is a dictatorship. You have to ask permission to use your own money. Square 4. Good night to the family and friends of lifelong learning. Make it yourself, Square 4. And you know he's lifelong learners here. Serlene Clark, good night, Serlene. A blessed good night, Kemar and co-host. The average Barbadian has the spirit of discernment. Thank you, Father, for the spirit of discernment. And I say thank ask for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Sean Cool. The Chinese need USD themselves in order to trade outside. Spirit 4, good night to all alternate viewers and their families from England, Scotland, and Ireland. Yes, we got our family in England, Scotland, and Ireland, all alternate viewers worldwide. Sean Cool says to connect we to trash currencies. I figure this is in response to going from the Swift system to the what do you call it, Kemar tap
Pops.
or the POP system. The POP system. Okay. Hmm. Square Four says Kemar, when the government of Kenya tried the cashless system, the old people get left at the bus stop when they didn't have one of those digital IDs. Yeah, that would be a sad day. Pedro Jamont says Ethiopia reached a loan 3.4 billion with an initial disbursement of 1 billion late last year. Hmm. Sean Yard, good night. Good night, Sean. Square Four. Myanmar President Putin said the beast system has been introduced. I believe him. Okay. And Roland Wave says good night. Oh, good night, Roland. Thank you for being here on Alternate Views. Mhm. What do you
Wait,
have to say, Mr. Stewart?
no, something just crossed my mind. Right, something just crossed my mind. No, it appears to me that Barbados has some foreign exchange floating around in it. However, it became very clear to me that this foreign exchange is all borrowed foreign exchange, as we had COVID and we were constantly a country running deficits. We were never earners of foreign exchange per se, so we were always in a borrowing state. Right? So we have debt obligations that are substantially higher, Nigel. Right? Our debt obligations are substantially higher than any income that we could earn possibly as it relates to foreign exchange to be able to repay those debt obligations. Right? So to repay those debt obligations, we have to be constantly borrowing foreign exchange to keep paying off other debts. So you're borrowing debt to pay debt. And essentially that is what you call a debt trap. Right? So I want to go on here because I like my visuals. Right? I know I like my visuals. And I want to pull up an article by a good economist, right? Hoping that I get um the internet to work. Right? Yeah, it's working, it's working, it's working. So we're gonna see something up on the screen in a second. Um, right, now do you have a question?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Pedro Jamont says, Nigel, what would you call Burkina Faso leader? Dictatorship or democracy? Well, I will go off of what is defined. It's defined as it operates under a semi presidential republic system with powers divided between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The president is head of state, while a prime minister appointed by the president serves as head of government. The National Assembly, a unicameral parliament, holds legislative power. I won't call that a dictatorship. However, I see where you're trying to go, Pedro. I see where you're trying to go, and I understand. Um, Based on where he is, based on the systems that he is currently trying to defend and trying to promote in his country, it may look like that, and it may require that type of headstrongness. However, I don't think it's a dictatorship. But as it says, it is a semi presidential republic system. I hope I answer your question, Pedro. That's a good question. Though. I like that one.
I like that question as well. So let me just read what a debt trap is, Nigel. Right. So this article here is by Anthony Wood. Right. So remember we just defined that Barbados in a situation right now where we have to be, we're not earning from tourism, we're not earning from international business, right? So we don't earn foreign exchange from we don't sell oil, we don't export enough to earn enough foreign exchange based off the appetite that we have, right? So the rate that we spend and the rate that we consume, we don't earn enough to keep up with that consumption rate. So we have to borrow to keep up with that rate of consumption, right? So it's safe to say no that Barbados has no earned foreign reserves at all, no earned foreign reserves at all borrowed foreign reserves, right? All borrowed foreign reserves, and our debt obligations are substantially higher than our ability to earn the requisite foreign exchange to pay down these debts. So therefore, we have to borrow debt to pay debt.
Mhm.
So here is Anthony Wood, economist, making an argument about Barbados's debt trap, right? And let me read what Anthony Wood is saying. Anthony Wood is arguing that the pronouncements of Professor Michael Howard on Barbados's precarious debt situation must be taken seriously by Barbadians. Wood noted that the IMF debt since the government entered the program in 2018 amounts to 870 million, with the government expected to repay 928 million by 2029. Right? You hear that? The government is expected to repay 928 million by 2029. So it says, it spoke about Wood here and his background and Onafa and but Wood said that Dr. Kevin Greenwich, the IMF and the USA Treasury Department were optimistic that Barbados would be able to service the debt in full within the stipulated repayment period. Conversely, he noted Dr. Howard, a retired professor of economics and specialist in public finance, has serious reservations about Barbados' ability to repay the IMF loan based on the current economic trajectory of the government. Howard's contention must be taken seriously given what transpired since the administration was able to reduce national debt from around $17 billion to just under $12 billion. Right? And then he spoke about the 2018 debt restructuring exercise. Right? He said that we should be reminded that the domestic debt holders, meaning the national insurance, the central bank. Remember we spoke about the central bank and the central bank loaning to government, and that's what happened between 2013 to 2018, or that monetary expansion. So here is it again that Mr. Wood is speaking about through the central bank and the national insurance and the private financial institutions. They suffered in a disproportionate manner compared to the external debt holders when the administration refused to pay about $4.5 billion out of the $17 billion in debt. You heard what he said. He said they refused to pay. So this is the debt restructuring exercise, Nigel, that we spoke about, where the government was keeping that money, right, and not paying it out immediately. So Wood went on to argue that at the time of the debt restructuring, the size of the Barbados economy was over $10 billion, and the important foreign exchange generated tourism sector was performing well. However, during the period of the IMF and other external loans accumulating, The Barbados economy declined to around $8 billion at one point, and the tourism sector virtually ground to a halt at the height of the COVID pandemic. Excessive borrowing during a rapid economic decline will naturally present difficulty for a government to service its debts, Wood told Barbados Today. And he explained that despite the economy showing signs of improvement over the last 6 months, mainly driven by the tourism sector, the government continued to borrow substantial sums from external sources. In fact, he indicated that the national debt had risen to approximately $13 billion. Right? He said that given the paucity of financial and economic information provided by Dr. Greenwich, that Barbadians cannot accept their optimistic view of Barbados' ability to easily or adequately repay the IMF loan in full by 2029. Right? And he said that it was nonsensical to discuss the IMF loan in isolation from the other loans granted to Barbados, and the reality that the other loans will have to be sought over the short to the medium term to keep the Barbados economy afloat. I suggested that once the source of new loans commencing within 6 months is within 6 months is very likely to be the same IMF as the government enters a new program with the institution before the year ends. And we are at birth 3 as was announced by the government. So do you see the debt trap? Um Alternative viewers that Anthony Wood is saying, and he wound it up in saying here, viewers, that if the current situation has to be extended, Barbados will have to engage in heavy external borrowing to prop up the foreign reserves and help with external debt obligations. In this case, Barbados will be plunged further into the debt trap, as stated by Professor Howard. So
Mhm.
this wound up to basically how we started, Nigel. Hey,
Yeah,
this
exactly
wound
how
up
we start.
to exactly how we started.
Mm. So I think you got a question there, Mr. Stuart.
Wait, you said help me. Did that central bank report stated its first quarter? Right, I not understanding the question. Pedro, you may gotta ask the question in a different format. Um, Lemuel was asking as what is Dr. Robinson praising in terms of the tariff response? He was praising government's economic strategy of trying to skillfully switch allegiances in in light of the tariff. So switch allegiances. I think we went through that, you know, a bit in terms of the allegiances and XYZ on a very deep side. Um, so yeah, he was praising the skillful strategy. He said, "That's yeah." Uncle said using debt to pay debt is path to bankruptcy. Well, basically that is where we are. Barbados is almost bankrupt. Barbados is bankrupt. If you reduce the borrowing appetite that Barbados has from the international landscape, Nigel, if you take away that borrowing, right, tourism continues to underperform and we rely on taxation. So how are you going to fill that massive hole when you reduce the borrowing other than by further taxation and by further expenditure cuts to create savings? Right? So if you can't live without borrowing, you're basically bankrupt.
Correct.
So Barbados is indeed bankrupt. If you look at the definition of what bankruptcy is.
Mm.
No.
So let me ask you this question before you move forward. Based on the structure of Barbados. We don't produce enough exports that could bring in enough money so we will be in profit margins. So we gotta borrow. We spend a lot of money on the imports because our appetite for international flavor is surpassing what we make. Now, what are some of the economic strategies or some of the alternate views on a country that doesn't produce enough to sustain itself, relies on external factors to stay afloat? What are some of the recommendations for a country like Barbados to move forward or at least have some type of sustainability outside of what we are discussing right now?
Well, in alternate views, I would have argued basically that wage increases will suffice, tax cuts to suffice, export incentives to create competitiveness, make it easier for local Barbadians to export, which would definitely involve giving them access to the foreign currency to be able to do those trades. Okay. Um, as opposed to using a contractionary policy, you will use a expansionary policy, but not expansion as in go and print money to pay wages, right? Or go and print money to pay a bill or print money to pay a debt, right? You use the expansionary policy to drive operations to bring income, right? So the one-off measure is if they print money and they pay wages, yes, the wages will end back up in the economy through taxation and through spend, right? But you try to solve more than one problem at the same time. So using the expansionary policy to for government to create policies for small businesses, for growing medium-sized businesses to large businesses, for creating large businesses to multinational businesses, right? Um, that is the way we should go or propose solution, right? So you will solve the unemployment crisis, right? It solve the income crisis, right? Um, while also creating, let's say, new business um, avenues for further taxation, right? Through receiving businesses from the tax, receiving tax from the business, receiving tax from the workers as well, and to be able to sustain business cycles using the expansionary policy. Right? So you see the substantial benefit between, or the difference between printing money for wages and bills. Right? But I'm not saying printing money, but using the expansionary policy for wages and bills, right? Versus using the policy to create a silo for business development. Like,
Okay, copy that. So that's all from an economic standpoint. Okay.
yeah.
What
No,
about any internal production, agriculture? Do we have the capacity to develop in that stage where one we could supply everything for us, not everything, but a substantial amount for ourselves from ourselves, and then so also have enough to export to bring in however much percentage that could do.
agriculture. Agriculture is the right way to go as a country. You need to feed the people. You need to be able to feed the people, but it has to be a sustainable exercise. Right? No, agriculture for profit within a population that is so small may not be the most viable. Right? For to sustain oneself and just to eat just for survival is fine, but you won't really get much profits or the profits that are needed to, you know, to achieve skill. So you have to be investing in agriculture for export purposes, to earn foreign exchange, to create jobs while still feeding locals, right? Agriculture was the only sector to grow during COVID, but because Barbados is landlocked to the point where Many of the idle plantations around the island belong to insurance companies. So Sagicor owns significant amounts of plantation lands in Barbados. Clico owns substantial amounts of plantation lands in Barbados. Many of these plantations are owned by private people. What is owned by private, the government owns. So there was an attempt to conceptualize something called the feed program. However, along the way, we started to hear complaints about drought and lack of availability of water. Then we see the government trying to bail out to the sugar industry because of a reduction in the preferential trade agreements with the European Union. Um, and there's no serious push to invest in agriculture. We had a shortage of chickens. We have a shortage of pigs. We imported eggs. Like agriculture is just a complete disaster in tropical Barbados, where countries like Saint Vincent tends to be agricultural success. Jamaica is finding its way into being an agricultural success, right? So Barbados has some of the best soil, some of the best temperatures, some of the best everything, but there's no national vision. There's no national vision for agriculture. In a world where there are trade agreements and where Barbados signed on to the World Trade Organization, and where there is a reduction in protectionism, also the fact, Nigel, that many of the inputs that go into the agricultural sector come from imports, right? So the agricultural sector is not necessarily a local sector where majority of the inputs will come from here, right? So we still have to import a lot of the stuff that we have to input into the agricultural sector. So therefore, you end up losing the skill that you try to achieve and made a sustainable venture. So the average minded policymaker will say, well, let us favor imports. So we go and find food that cheap somewhere and import that as opposed to trying to grow food that's so expensive and taking up money. So it's just an economic decision based off scale, where, say, for example, Barbados decided to want to grow potatoes, and potatoes work out to be $150 a rod. Um, how about going into Idaho and buying potatoes at 10 US a rod, right? And shipping them to Barbados mass base and then retailing them and making, hundreds percent profit, right? So that's a much easier way to go, the much lucrative way to go. And basically, when you have a private sector that's not so creative, that's more interested in just buy, sell, retail, and not so much production, um, yeah, we end it here. But
Mhm.
now you say that though, I just remembered something that was shared when I attended the Central Bank of Barbados Economic Research Conference, the Caribbean Research Conference, and we I sat and I listened to Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the American economist Jeffrey Sachs, and Jeffrey Sachs argued about a global tax policy. So this global tax policy says that persons who originate from a country, so you originate from Barbados, Niger, but you are not based here. Jeffrey Sachs is saying that countries should seek out global tax arrangements for citizens who migrate and go into other countries. Right? So that entails if you pay a 20% tax rate in the US, Barbados should be entitled to at least 7% of that taxation, which should then be repatriated to the country. So as long as you're a Barbadian or living anywhere in the world, um,
Mhm.
part of your taxes, not an increase, but a component thereof, the existing rate
Belongs to the economy.
should come to the Barbados economy. And that was a proposal by Professor Jeffrey Sachs on how Caribbean economies could a global taxation policy and seek out alternate streams of revenue.
That's a very alternate view. In your estimation, would that be a viable option? Is that a realistic option? Would the expats from all of the our countries would they be? This is assuming that they would agree to something like that. One and two. Um, would it actually cause a shift in the economy of the country, having access to the taxes from their income that they make abroad?
I don't necessarily see anything wrong with the idea as being totally bad, to say it's a totally bad policy, but I could understand the apprehension to wanting to hear something like that, right? Because although you're a Barbadian, you didn't work or you didn't, you know, but that is sort of like what Trump is saying. As long as you benefit from the American education system or you benefit from it, you know, in any way, you should pay some level of taxation to help rebuild and build up the country. So if we are seeking to bring a tax on those persons in the diaspora, whether it is global citizens tax or whatever, you have to encompass an entire strategy for the diaspora, right? So that strategy should involve looking at voters' rights, right? That strategy should involve having a say in how the country actually runs. So if you pay taxes, although you're not in Barbados, that tax should come with rights and responsibilities, a trade-off, a benefit. Like, so you will pay the tax in exchange for some social good or some social benefit. Right? So, for example, if the logic put forward is that you were born in a Barbadian hospital to Barbadian parents, you went to the Barbadian school system, primary school, secondary school, BCC for basically subsidized education, and then you happen to go overseas and live Barbados from your formative years, your formative education years, and experts are saying, well, you know, no matter where you go in the world, as long as you have that Barbadian passport, you pay a minimum global tax, that which goes back to your rebuilding your country. So that sounds very, very, very patriotic. Like, it sounds
Extremely.
patriotic. It
Hmm.
also sounds like a move to repatriate. Like when many of our foreparents went to the Panama Canal, when many of our
Hmm.
foreparents migrated to other countries, to the US, Canada, States, Europe, and they sent money back home to their families and to help build up whatever. In Jamaica, remittances are one of the largest economic line items in terms of revenue. Money coming into Jamaica from Jamaicans living abroad sending money back, right? So government still tax remittances anyhow, right? So what Jeffrey Sachs is not basically proposing is that as long as you're a citizen of a country, regardless of where you are, it's sort of like a borderless state, if that makes sense. Right? A borderless state. So, what's the future of the world? Do we will see more borderless states happening? I know America has, uh, like, if you're an American and you are in trouble anywhere in the world, America comes to defend the citizens and defend the rights anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
Right? So maybe a strategy like that could work for a global power like America. Right? Maybe a global strategy could work for those bigger powers like Africa, who has millions and millions and millions of citizens over and abroad. But for small island economies like Barbados, um, I don't see Barbados having 100,000 billions overseas. So I don't see the tax base within the diaspora as that broad, and therefore I don't see the need to, or the amount of money spent to administrate that tax. I don't think it will be favorable in terms of overall collection because we just don't have the population and the numbers, right, for it to be feasible. That's just how I see it, but I could be proven wrong. Somebody could show me numbers and get me rethink, but that's just
All
my
right.
perspective.
All right. Here's an alternative view. I want your perspective on this. So the leader of South Africa, he's singing the Captain Ibrahim Traore's praises. He's echoing the Pan Africanist motto of self determination. Self sustainability, and he's saying that just like Gaddafi, Africa should unite into one. As one in that type of unity, they will have much more power on a global scale. Now, let me bring that down to CARICOM. Is that something that is being broached? Is that a conversation of being under one currency in the Caribbean, being a one Caribbean people? Um, is that something that is a viable option, a realistic option? Is it being spoken about? What do you think?
Well, as it relates to a common currency in the Caribbean, at one point in time, the Guyanese currency, the Trinidadian currency, and the Jamaican currency were pegged at one point to the US dollar, and they were also pegged to the British pound, I believe. Right? Um, they all had devaluations. And these are all countries that have their own individual currencies with their own individual central banks. Right? So Jamaica has its own central bank, Trinidad has its own central bank, Barbados has its own central bank, and Guyana has its own central bank because they have their own separate currencies. Right? There are countries within the Caribbean which have a common currency. Right? So the OECS currencies, the countries that spend um was it called at all? No, EC dollars. Right? So the
Mm-hmm,
country, so Saint Lucia, Dominica, Grenada, uh, Vinci, they all spend EC dollars. Right? So the question was asked, well, why can't Barbados do away with its currency and join the EC currency union? However, I heard Governor of the Central Bank, Kevin Strahan, said that that will more than likely never happen, right? Because Barbados will have to do away with its own central bank and own currency to then adopt the EC dollar, and that just won't happen, right? So, Dr. World economist, right? Dr. World economist argued that we need a common currency for all Caribbean countries to foster greater regional integration, right? What should that common currency be? So remember, we have the EC dollar, we have Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Barbados having their own currencies. We see the issues associated with these currencies. Um, so what could be a common currency for all of these countries? Dr. Delaware is saying, look, try not to reinvent the wheel too much. We don't need to come up with anything new for a common currency within the Caribbean. Why don't all of these Caribbean countries retire their currencies and use the US dollar as the common currency for the Caribbean countries, right? So since the US is so close in proximity, the US dollar is widely accepted among all Caribbean countries already. Many of them already partially dollarized by accepting again, opening up, liberalizing, sorry, the economies, having the US dollar penetration. So the lower world is saying that the US dollar should be adopted as the common Caribbean currency because it's already widely accepted among all of them. It's much easier. You don't have to reinvent the wheels. Otherwise, it'd be quite difficult to conceptualize the currency for different Caribbean states. Um, what would be the measure and the base or the value of a common currency for the Caribbean? Right? How would we how would we measure it? How would it be measured? What would it be backed by? Um, if you look at the European Union, who has the euro, right? You could look at how the euro was conceptualized, how it functions. As you know, Europe, many different countries, but one common currency. Right? So, in your question, Nigel, what would be the vision for a common currency among Caribbean countries? Dr. Lowell is suggesting, Dr. Lowell is suggesting, um, the US dollar as the common currency, right? The US dollar as the common currency for all Caribbean countries. I even had this conversation today, and a guy supporter within the marketing field was saying that he would like a common Caribbean currency, but he had no solution as to how he would um, move forward with that Caribbean currency. But then I also introduced him to what Dr. Delaware was saying. But I myself, Nigel, my personal opinion is that I would love to see a common traded currency among any Caribbean country. But again, I often think about scope. I often think about scale. I also think about Barbados dollars cannot be spent outside of Barbados. TT dollars cannot be spent outside of TT, right? So we don't want another case or another currency where it can only be spent just within the couple of Caribbean countries, which are often small, right? You don't want another case like that. You want a currency, right? You want a currency that can be universally accepted among the world, that the Caribbean countries could do business and have open trade with these countries, and these countries be willing to accept the Caribbean currency for trade. So the closest thing to that, according to these economists, would simply be the US dollar.
And that comes with its own challenges and okay. I see someone saying that we can't quite unify economically until political unification takes place. Is that a viable option? Is that realistic within the Caribbean? Is that not what CARICOM is supposed to represent in a sense?
I believe that the old CARICOM structure needs to be abolished. The
Mhm.
Treaty of Chaguaramas needs to be revisited, abolished in its current iteration, and refurbished for a more modern Caribbean. I think the current structure that we have is one that is exclusive of the people. Um, CARICOM, or the personnel who heads the CARICOM meetings, are really a prime minister, a minister of foreign affairs, and the CARICOM ambassador. Those three persons. Quite often, we don't hear feedback as to what happens in these meetings. We see a little press release here, maybe, but issues like CARICOM are not discussed on the floor of our parliament. Right? So there's the European Parliament, but we have CARICOM, but there's no Caribbean Parliament. Right? There's no Parliament of the Caribbean. So when these guys, these prime ministers go to their regional heads of government meetings and they agree on something, prime example, all Caribbean governments agreed to reduce the taxation on LIAT, right? Taxation on the flights for LIAT. They agreed on it in the room, but when they get back to the countries, they're refusing to uphold the end of the bargain, right? So what type of sham is CARICOM if you could sit in the room and agree to it? No, and there's no mechanism to ensure that you hold up your end of the bargain because you know prime ministers don't necessarily want cede power or cede domestic political power to a regional system, right? So there's no binding mechanism in terms of a Caribbean parliament which would enforce decisions that are made, um, enforce decisions that are made for the local domestic space, right? So I think the Treaty of CARICOM needs to be revisited. It needs to be refreshed, brought forward to a more modern, practical Caribbean with mechanisms, with binding mechanisms in place. We had Professor Avinash Prasad on this show at time, and Avinash Prasad came up with a called the Bold 9.58 plan, which was a speed up mechanism for decisions made at CARICOM, right? So it clearly shows that CARICOM in its current iteration is not working for the Caribbean, right? And the fact that LIAT, which was the Caribbean's, I don't, the Caribbean's baby, which was managed by Caribbean governments, was destroyed by the act of Caribbean prime ministers, and there was no remedy to this situation at worst to today. It shows us clearly that CARICOM is utmost and almost irrelevant as it is right now, and it needs to be rehashed, refreshed, and improved for a modern day economy. Nigel.
Okay, copy that. Thank you for that very deep comment. And I see the people in the comment also. The comment section has those same mindsets. It is interesting because what comes up in my mind is it that it is the system that is in place which is causing these things to happen, or is it just the individual management, the character types that get into these positions now have to play a certain role or don't fulfill the mindset of being for the people first, where it always looks as if the bigger heads are living sweet and the average man ain't really, struggling. I hear my elders speak of Barbados at old when things was sweet, when things was cool, things were affordable. You could go out on a weekend, you know. But however, this is where we at now. Um, Going forward, going back to this dollarization, devaluation, and depreciation as we wind up in this last half hour of the show, we have established that dollarization is already on the way. That process has already begun. I can answer this explicitly. How soon should we look forward to Barbados now not having a currency and using the US dollar as our official currency?
Well, it's all about choices. So that could happen in the click of a finger if the government wakes up tomorrow and chooses to not fully, but partially dollarize some more up until you get 100% dollarization. It is a choice, right? Now, a devaluation um, happens when you basically run out of foreign reserves and the banks are not willing to sell you the foreign reserves at the rate that is at. As you said, the banks are not willing to sell you the foreign reserves at the 2 to 1. The bank decide, well, I can sell you at 7 to 1. Like, so that's where the devaluation would come from. Right? So if you keep borrowing from the IMF, as Dr. Gray said, the, the external devaluation is always a choice. Mm. So it's either we would choose to continue internally devaluing the currency, and internally devaluing the currency, which would essentially essentially you should know every government entity That will see you cutting back on all the national insurance benefits. That will see you charging services for schools and education, healthcare, right? That will see you increasing bus fares, carrying up gas, carrying up water, carrying up light, carrying up food prices even more, gas prices even more, to the point that you have hyperinflation like how Zimbabwe, right? Where you have like see how Guyana had you like $500 bills and $1,000 bills and $5,000 bills. So eventually the inflation gets to the roof that the value of the currency is no more. It's basically baseless and it's worthless because you would have run out to the foreign exchange necessary to keep that equilibrium that is workable and balanced. So if the government decide to wake up and print a gazillion dollars and say free money for everybody, um, that's basically like hyperinflation and the cost of everything will just shoot up, shoot straight up uh through the roof, and eventually the money will have no value or anything of the like. Um, so I don't think it's going to get that far. Measures will continuously be implemented, taxes will be increased to be able to constantly bring the economy back into equilibrium. No, if any drastic thing happens, though, any drastic world war, anything drastic that cause serious stoppage within the world economy, tourists stop coming. Um, the IMF says, but the IMF can always lend us the money. But IMF says, but we lend it at a higher cost now. You only be entitled to the second batch of money if you do external devaluation, right? So you basically have no choice now, as it will be mandated that to have access to the drawdown, you will need to do the currency external devaluation because this they can't internally devalue because they ain't got nothing left to sell off. All the state enterprises sold, fees are already up, levies are already up, taxes are already up, can't carry them up no more. And you have no choice now, Nigeria, because you're out of foreign reserves and you're out of options to borrow those foreign reserves. So my requirement is for you to externally devalue. And also as opposed to 2 to 1, you gotta pay me 7 now to
Mm-hmm.
1, and you ain't got no other choice because nobody ain't gonna get the money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I left it between a rock and a hard place.
Yep.
Okay. Understood. Understood. I hope everybody has enjoyed alternate views and this very extensive programming on dollarization, with references from alternate views. Again, this book is available for you on Amazon. You said it was also in the Parliament Library, Kemar?
Yeah, it's online again at Amazon.com. You can order a copy of it, have it directly delivered to you. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
Amazon.
copy that. All right. Any other words from you, Mr. Stewart, before we get into the wrap up segment?
I just want to say thank you to. I just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. I have one last statement to make. A statement that was issued today from the International Monetary Fund on Barbados. So let me read that for the audience, Nigel, and then uh, that is wrap up time. So it says here on my screen, this is a statement published, taken from the IMF, um, the 9th of May 2025. It says Barbados secure staff level deal on fund reviews. End of mission press release. It says This includes a statement of IMF staff team meetings that convey primarily findings after a visit to a country or virtual staff meeting. Well, that is the whole semantics. So the meaty stuff, it says here that the IMF team reached a staff level agreement with Barbadian authorities on the completion of the fifth and final reviews on the extended fund facility and the resilience and sustainability facility arrangements. The IMF executive board is expected to consider board reviews in June. This May and June, right? So in about a month. And once the reviews are approved by the IMF executive board, Barbados will have access to US 57 million in financing. Barbados' economy continues to perform well. Growth has been robust, inflation has been moderated, and the external position has been strengthened. Nevertheless, risks to the outlook are tilted to the downside given the highly uncertain external economic environment and Barbados' vulnerability to natural disasters. Implementation of the Homegrown Economic and Recovery Plan BERT 2022 remains strong, and the authorities continue to focus on increasing resilience by maintaining what are called fiscal discipline and debt sustainability. So, Mr. Perks, who was the team leader, said that following productive discussions, the IMF team and the Barbadian authorities reached a staff level agreement, and as was said, they approved to be a total of 57 million. He said that the economy grew strongly in 2024 and continues to expand in 2025, driven by tourism, construction, and business services. Now, this sounds very much like the show we had um, last week on the governor of the central banks review on his report,
Mm-hmm.
right? Same exact thing. Uh, tourism, construction, and business services. Um, yeah, so we come down here now. It says that international reserves have almost increased to US 1.7 billion or 7 months import cover, ample to support the exchange rate peg. So you see it there?
Mm.
So we have to be constantly borrowing foreign exchange to keep maintaining that currency peg. So what happens when we don't have access to borrow the foreign exchange and the US dollars from the tourism and other foreign exchange earnings are not happening? You see then the peg becomes on the track. Right? So you borrow the reserves and you top them up to keep that peg safe. But how sustainable, Nigel, is it a policy to be constantly borrowing reserves at that level to maintain the peg? What happens when the credit card stops? Huh? Yeah. So yeah, all this other stuff is, I don't want to get too deep into that. So that is basically the gist of it. To report to you really that the IMF just had a recent visit in the country. We're looking to sign on to another IMF program to have another disbursement. To sign on to
57
BERT
million.
3.0, and this 57 million opens the door. This suggests the IMF, but this has nothing to do with the CDB. This has nothing to do with the IADB. This has nothing to do with the World Bank and the other multilateral institutions who loan Barbados money. Um, yeah, so the IMF debt is but a small part of the larger debt that we owe to foreign creditors. Um, so yeah, so devaluation, depreciation, dollarization. I am hoping that you got a good grasp of those concepts tonight. Um, Anybody needing any clarity on any topics, can let me know. Um, I'd be happy to explain briefly. We have 9 more minutes. I can't say too much after 10, so we have 9 more minutes. And yeah, so Nigel, there is a story I want to read from Alternate Views to wrap up.
Mhm.
What you what you don't mind indulging me?
No, just give me the page. Let me follow along.
Page 111. 111. And it says here that it asks this question: is the Barbados dollar secure? And if I want to say the heading, the Barbados dollar secure, is open to several interpretations, depending on who is making the statement and to whom the statement is being directed. Right? It says here balance sheets are often meant to add confidence to a business. According to our balance sheet, the Barbados dollar is only secured if the IMF and other lending concerns are prepared to lend us more money in the future. Lending us more money means further debt. There was a time when we were targeting to be within 6% of the trading gap before COVID. Perhaps because of this, lending agencies have been prepared to assist, but the situation now is precarious. He went on to argue about the central bank, but I don't want to go down that line. So it says taking a beating. It says, you see, there was no money to pay the banks and the old people holding bonds, so the investors had to take a beating. Furthermore, the government had to find somewhere to put the balancing of the debts by borrowing. The debt is offset by the IMF debt, which was around 470 million at that time, the IDB 400 million, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development 200 million, and the Latin American Bank 200 million, as well as other foreign exchange borrowings. And all of these funds are held by the central bank. On the other side of the balance sheet, to cover the gaping hole in the name of the government, over time the government will have to deal with this hole. Failure to plug this hole will be worse than when we were bombarded with downgrades. Mhm. He went on to say here, right, that Barbados is on the brink of a precipice, sorry, right, precipice. Says, what am I getting at? Is that we are still on the brink of a precipice, and there is no such thing as a secure Barbados dollar, just as there was no such thing as a secure Jamaican dollar. And he would like to see all publicity gained for Barbados at the COP conferences and the climate change conferences and all of these world conferences. He would hope that these things would be translated into not so much loans for the country, but into material help and grants for the country. Right? So since the world is talking about reducing its carbon footprint, this means that the thought of a simple thing like manufacturing gas and diesel and engines will be a thing of the past. We will have to start importing those vehicles that provide tax for the government. We will have a major problem since a major transformation will involve a decision to adopt new technology as we have no means of dumping thousands of cars on the island. That will be impractical. And this is only of one of the many decisions that we shall have to make on impacting of our Barbadian dollar. And he do hope that the relevant authorities in the Ministry of Finance are not misguided by an assertion that we are secure. And at the last time he took a look at our balance sheets. The ability to pay loans was contingent on our earning capacity. Right? So Nigel, isn't that what we were saying all along?
Absolutely. Same story, same song.
And that was the article written by Harry Russell, an experienced banking professional. And it says here alternative views that this article by Mr. Harry Russell falls in tandem with points being tabled and published in alternate views. My research on the state of the Barbados dollar and the economic earning capacity of Barbados to repay IMF loans. And there comes the end of the story on the Barbados dollar, devaluation, dollarization, and depreciation. So thank you very much.
Okay, give you a wrap up of everything we just hear, but we need it from you. What should we be expecting? What should we be looking for? What should we be hoping for? Or just give you the reality of the situation before we call it a night?
Well, the reality is the Barbados dollar is not facing an external devaluation so soon, because we still have the appetite to borrow to maintain the exchange rate peg. However, an internal devaluation is what Barbados is facing at the moment. Right? So we will continue to experience wage restraint, wage restraints. We will continue to experience cuts in different ministries. We will continue to experience a reduction in budgets, a reduction in subsidies, changes to the national insurance, reductions in credit to the government from the central bank and other government institutions, uh, continued cuts to severance and unemployment benefits and these type of benefits. You'll continue to see more and more resources being paid out to interest, sorry, to the IMF. You will see a continue the borrowing appetite increase as like a lazy policy, as like a lazy policy, because the government may not necessarily come up with creative ideas to be able to earn the foreign exchange when we could go and borrow it and then just collect some taxes and pay off, right? Um, a high cost of living, as was said, taxation is charged as a percentage of price. So therefore, every time the prices in the supermarkets and gas and everything goes up, the government collects more and more and more and more money from those goods and services because taxation is charged as a percentage of price. So if the price of an item is $6 today and taxation is 1% of that item, and the price goes up to 7% tomorrow, well, the government now collects 1% on $7. If it goes up to 8 tomorrow, the government collects 1% on $8. So therefore, the government's revenue in terms of tax collection is increasing every time the prices within the Barbados economy goes up, and therefore we will not be seeing any serious reductions or any serious effort to tackle the cost of living and any effort to reduce it because the government will be the loser. Um, in trying to follow the future trends in terms of dollarization, Nigeria, like they said, we are already on the way to dollarization. We are partially dollarized at the moment, and based off the fact that the US is trying to regain dominance in the world space, um, and the fact that the economic structures of Barbados is getting weaker, and you're seeing a further liberalization and a further easing of capital controls and foreign exchange controls to an extent, right? As I said, these are the first beginner stages of currency devaluation and depreciation, right? Because we have a fixed exchange rate, right? We have a fixed rate, so there's not much room for speculating, right? So a fixed rate, Nigel, is 2 to 1, but a floating rate today it could be 2 to 1, tomorrow it could be 3, tomorrow it could be back to 2. We don't have that in Barbados. We don't have that floating rate, so we have that stable rate. So to be able to depress, because remember everything the US economy grows, the Barbados economy has to find a way to correct itself to match that because we're tied, right? Because we're tied. So the more money we have to be looking for constantly to keep competing at that level, putting the country under further stress, therefore putting the country in a position where we don't have the resources to continuously maintain at that level, and we have to be expanding our borrowing appetite to maintain that because of the stabilization program and the IMF program, which continuously extracts resources out of the economy, Nigel, through taxation and increase and interest and increases um in interest. So my parting question again, ask the authorities. This question can go straight to the governor of the central bank. The governor of the central bank declared in his interview on dollarization, which is featured on his social media page, he declared that the money supply in Barbados is $4.4 billion. So I want to put the question to the governor of the central bank. If the money supply is $4.4 billion in 2025, what was the quantity of the money supply in 2018 before we went through this IMF stabilization program? And show us the gradual either increase or decrease along the way from 2018 to 2025, and give us, some explanation or deeper thoughts on the money supply of Barbados and why it is at the state where it is at right now. So, hoping that is a short synopsis for you, Nigel.
For sure. And thank you, as always, for educating the people and putting your expertise on show. It still is a wonder to me that all of that is written in this book. All of that is laid out in this book. So again, kudos to you. Thank you for all of the alternate viewers that sat with us for the last couple hours discussing these issues and topics surrounding our Barbadian dollar. Always remember to like, share, and subscribe. Peace to the planet. Hope everybody have a great and a safe weekend. I'll leave your last comments to you, Mr. Stewart.
So, thank you guys very much for tuning in. We are at the end of Alternative Views this week. So, I want to thank you to all everyone who tuned in. Um, Good night to Lifelong Learning. Good night to the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. Good night to Rashid. Good night to Shem. Good night to Joshua. Um, Good night to Mr. Juke, Watson Juke, and the crew from over in Ireland. Good night to all Barbadians on the show. Good night to everybody from St. John, the city, St. George, St. Lucie, St. Philip, whole of Barbados. Everyone in the diaspora as well. Barbadians all over the globe. Thank you very much for making Alternative Views your show of preference for knowledge and lifelong learning. So, we have some other streams coming up unrelated to Alternative Views. So, watch the page for those. I'm sure you would have saw what we did on Tuesday. That's happening every Tuesday, Political Tuesdays. So, we have a separation. This is purely educational, Alternative Views, and Tuesday is purely political. So, you're not going to mix the two. So, let's keep it um floating. Yeah, so big up to all of the Rastafari community, Christian community, Muslim community, all communities. Big up to Abraham Traore, big ups to Donald Trump, big ups to Vladimir Putin, big ups to Xi Jinping, Kim Jong Un, Nicolas Maduro, all of the leaders of the world, Decon Mitchell, everybody through the Caribbean. Just a few good people, but larger to all of the leaders of the world. We wish you the best, definitely. Congratulations to the new Pope on being appointed as well.
Mm-hmm.
Godspeed. So thank you very much, alternate viewers. It was good to have you. Good night, Pedro, Square 4, Lemuel, Mr. Angel, rolling with Tyrone Nurse, Romeo Hickson, Sean Cole, Omar Gibson.
Pedro funny.
Yeah, everybody. Pedro Asif, not me.
He's looking for trouble.
Boy, so you want me to say? You want me to say? No, Pedro, boy, you can't get me to say. But yeah, but I mean, at some point in time, we have to have that discussion, though, Pedro, about or the Prime Minister of Barbados. A very open discussion, biased discussion. Um, like I said, there are good things about every leader. There's some things you like, there's some things you don't like. So if you are unbiased, we should be able to have that discussion on the leadership of the Prime Minister of Barbados from a purely observational perspective, with no skin in the game. I am willing to have that open discussion, on leadership. We always see it for modern leaders. Because I see people now starting to, compare Motley and Traore and Gaddafi and Sankara, and so I am almost ready for that, but not tonight. Yeah. So we out of here at 7 minutes past 10. So we look forward to seeing you guys next week. So have a good night, alternate viewers, and see you
Blessing
later.
everybody.